to this edition of Soft Cover. Today we have with us author Reeta Ramamurthy Gupta, who has worked on this amazing book by Harper Collins. It's called Savitribai Phule, Her Life, Her Relationships, Her Legacy. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. Ma'am, I would like to begin talking about how you selected this topic. Like, what was the idea behind it?
As you know, this is my fourth book. And just when I finished writing the biographies of Rakesh Prakash Mehra and Sanjeev Kumar, my daughter asked me, why are you writing the stories of men, being a woman yourself? And then I looked at all the data pertaining to women-led biographies of women, and I realized that there was a gap in literature in terms of recording and in terms of making the stories of women available. So I would say my daughter was the trigger for this. But then, of course, once I started examining the evidence that was available for Savitribai Phule, I was completely astounded, and I was wondering, how is it that this hasn't been written before? And this is the story of the lady because of whom you and I are having this conversation today.
Right.
Because of whom I can write books, because of whom any woman can write books. So I think this was long overdue.
Yes. Let me just remind my audience once, this book is about Savitribai Phule, who was India's first teacher, and not just a teacher, she also brought about a social revolution, which we often miss in the narratives. And it's beautifully written, of course, and it's very easy to comprehend also. I mean, when I picked up the book, I just couldn't keep it down, it was so gripping. And like you said, the evidence that you had to collect, I want to come to that, and I want to ask you, it was so long ago. So was the evidence easily available, and what were the hurdles you faced when you started research on it? Because like you said, nobody had written about her. So did you rely, what were your main sources for the research for this book?
Fortunately, there was a lot of literature available in Marathi. And one must give credit to Marathi historians. Back in the days, when we talk about the idea of nationhood, the idea of India coming together, we credit, say, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. We credit many people, but we have often forgotten to credit all the Marathi literature and the Marathi social revolution that happened at the time. And the important reason for this really was that the Bengalis, the intellectuals of Bengal, wrote in English, and the intellectuals of Maharashtra wrote in Marathi. So the gap in understanding their points of view, the gap in acknowledging and appreciating them, has been there a while. So when I delved into all the Marathi literature available at the time, I would say easily about 50-60 books that had various aspects of the time, the place, the revolution, the climbs, the hurdles, and of course the revolution that came. First was that, I think that gave me a skeletal framework. And then, of course, I kept going back to Pune to interview all the historians who had precious oral tradition that they were waiting to share.
Yeah, I want to ask you about this oral history also, that I'm sure you must have met people who knew the stories must have been, must have passed on from generations now. So besides written material, like, were you also as engrossed in the subject as you presented in your book when you were researching? Because
no, you're very kind. And, I'm reminded about Somerset Maugham. He said that there are 3 rules of writing a novel. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are. So, so when you start exploring, you're just hoping that the story leads you, right? Because you do not want to be the one that draws the boundary lines. As an author, your responsibility is to put the reader in the same room as the character.
Right.
So the boundary lines are not yours. The opinions are not yours. Therefore, you have to go where the story leads. I remember meeting a 93-year-old man. His name was Baba Adhav. And he is somebody who has followed and believed in Jyotirao Phule's work immensely. and the insights he shared. Simple things like, taking me to the place where Jyotirao and Savitri lived and where they dug the well, where they asked all the children to partake water from that well. And the little things he told me as we were walking to and back, I think they kind of set the context for me, because I knew that the more I reached out to people, the more the book would be richer, anecdotally, evidentially, and even empirically in a sense. So here, I have to share this picture with you and the readers. This is the only proof
Yeah, I
that
saw this photo. Yeah.
this is the only proof that Fatima Sheikh ever lived. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
This is the only
And
proof
she
that
plays such,
Sagunabai
and she
ever
plays such
lived.
an important role in, Savitribai's life also. Because she
Yes.
has her own rich experience, and which you clearly described in your book.
So, speaking to historians, reading countless literature, of course, sitting in government archives till they wanted to shut off the lights and send me home. So, so I think it's a journey, and of course, I would like to also credit a lot of the visiting writers of those times. The British obviously were better at documentation than we were. And they used to keep calling people to document what was happening in the courts. Even the Mughals wrote very well. I must share this. There's a lot of evidence, from that time. So taking whatever was available during the period, I would say, post the American independence, 1776 to 1856, which is really the last record of Fatima Sheikh, and then following Savitribai's story all the way to 1897. So this is the period, and anything pertaining to this period and anything pertaining to education or anything pertaining to Maharashtra, I think that was fodder for me, because I didn't know what I would find. It could be unrelated. It could be the story of a sati incident somewhere. And then obviously these conversations travel, and these conversations are traveling by people who are just about learning how to have conversations in the first place, right? Because there is no proof of education for all before this period.
Right.
Education was for the privileged few. And, this transition, the Charter Act of 1813, such a major landmark in the book, because if those missionaries had not got these books, Thomas Paine's The Right of Man to Pune, would Jyotirao Phule have read them? Would he have got introduced to ideals of freedom, justice, social liberty? Now, what about, Thomas Paine wrote that you don't need an intermediary to worship God. Now, imagine in a Brahminical society where you are being told what to do and what not to do, when there is an awareness that you don't need an intermediary to worship God sets in, how that changes mindsets.
Yeah.
Why are we listening to these people? Why are we allowing them to be interpreters for us? How do we verify whether what they are saying is true?
And when Savitribai Phule and Jyotirao, when they tried to break this through their own means, very slowly and steadily, they were first of all part of the same system. So they were also, part of. They were married when they were really young. Savitribai was not allowed to go to school, so they were in a way a part of the system. Yet they tried to break free from it.
Yes.
What are the learnings that people can get from it today? And if we imagine the scene at that time, of course, it was much more rigid, but we are still grappling with issues of caste, of discrimination, of child marriage, of women's education. Do you think this book takes us back to an era and gives us an important learning for today?
Absolutely. And it's so interesting that you bring it up. And I have been thinking about this myself during the many readings that we've had since the book was launched. Savitribai's blessings are taking the book places in a sense. I think, let me divide these learnings into three parts. The first is pragmatism, which is a lesson from Jyotirao. he knew that he had to be extremely practical. So he would work with the British, get contracts from them. Constructions that Jyotirao Phule did back then, they are still in Pune, the bridges and the other things that he built. You can see them in Pune today. So he was extremely pragmatic. He knew that for a revolution to happen, he needed money.
Yeah.
And he worked as a contractor of the British to raise the funds. The second thing is the ability to understand perception. So you know that Savitri and Fatima, they studied under Cynthia Farrar, who's a American missionary, right? Now, the people, in Pune where they lived, they perhaps thought that, oh dear, she has gone and studied under a missionary. Have they also decided to change their religion?
Yeah, that is probably the biggest fear at that time, that if you go into a missionary, you'll be converted. And
yes, have they converted? Are they still one among us? And that's when Savitribai does this Haldi Kunku festival. And she had a keen eye for people's perception. So there is pragmatism, there is perception. And the third, of course, is perseverance. When Savitri and Fatima used to go door to door asking people, please send your daughters to school, or even those who were from other varnas other than the Brahmins. So your Shudras, your Mahars, your Mangas, your Atishudras. So they are going from door to door and telling people, please send your children to school, please send your daughters to school. What is it that happens to them? Threats of physical abuse. They are shelled with stones, and cow dung is thrown on them, and dirt is thrown on them. And what do these two do? They calmly carry another sari in their bag, saying that, chalo, we are going to be in a complete mess by the time we reach school. Let us change and continue our work. Imagine such perseverance, such clarity of purpose, that no matter what, we are going to continue the revolution. I think these are, I would say, on the surface, but these three lessons are there. Every time I see a youngster feeling that, it's extremely difficult to reach their goal, look at these people. They were innovative. They found ways around it. Sometimes the path is not straight. You have to go around something and make the path. And these lessons are so relevant even today.
Yeah, absolutely. In a way, Savitri had Fatima's support. Fatima obviously relied on Savitri a lot. And then there was Jyotirao, who was getting them the funds, and also a very strong motivational factor behind what they all did together. Do you think, had even one of the characters been missing at that time, this would not have been possible, what they could achieve at that time? Do you think the story would have been incomplete?
Wow. It's not just them. I must share this for the benefit of our readers. This, of course, is India for me, right? This is the modern interpretation of the picture I showed you earlier. This is Sagunabai, Jyotirao's adoptive mother.
Yes.
She was a widow. She tried to open a school. And then there is a conversation between her and Savitribai in the book where she says that those Ponga Pandits shut my school down, right? So she then decided that she would be supportive of their efforts. Along with this, there was another Brahmin lady, Saraswati Govande, who was the friend of Jyotirao's wife, Sadashiv Govande. Now, the entire patriarchy and the culture of fear is being spread by the Brahmins. And at the same time, there are Brahmins who joined their movement and decided to learn and become teachers in the schools. There is Cynthia Farrar who taught them. There is Margaret Mitchell who taught them, right? So this is a movement which started taking groundswell, I would say, post 1776. Because if those books had not come, now just imagine, I give you a Chinese word, right? So let's discuss Zuyong. And then you will ask me, what is Zuyong? You have to first tell me what is Zuyong for us to discuss Zuyong. I say, no, let us discuss Zuyong. And that's it. And I keep looking at you, waiting for you to comprehend what I'm saying. This is the situation at that time. In a room of 100 people, one person was educated. So if you ask them to discuss ideas such as liberty and social justice, What does an uneducated person know?
Yeah.
Other than the fact that they have to get up in the morning, oh, this is their house, these are the precincts, this is supposedly their relative, this is the food to eat, this is how you answer nature's call. It's a very limited life.
Yeah.
Zuyon is liberty. Now, these ideas, how do you discuss these? How do you generate groundswell for education for all? If we do not have a common language to speak about, if we do not have ideas that we all understand. So, this is a story of a revolution which had many actors.
Yeah.
And that is why, even though I thought of writing about Savitribai Phule, it seemed almost inappropriate to not mention Fatima Sheikh's contributions, to not mention Saguna Bai's contributions, and full credit to my publisher for allowing me to do this.
Yeah. Also, this book is not limited to just their teaching, the classroom teaching or bringing children together. It talks about a lot of other things that they did outside of the classroom, such as digging the well in their backyard. And tell me more about that, or opening a shelter home for pregnant widows. So those kind of things were very, very crucial. And you mentioned it in the end of the book. So tell me, how did that weave into the story? And we are talking of revolution. So they are trying to break the norms, break the very rigid patriarchal systems that are already operating there. So, I would like you to talk more about this a bit.
No, thank you again. And thank you for reading the book, because your questions are making it so evident that you have followed the book so beautifully. So I must thank you first. So you opened the school, right? So they opened Bidewada first, 1st January 1848. They realized that there is no way to provide their girls, 6 girls had joined the school. There was no way to provide them water, right? Because the Brahmins at the time said that you cannot have the water from the well nearby. And Bidewada was shut down. Almost as soon as it opened.
That they opened, right?
Yes. And almost in tandem, Jyotirao and Savitri were asked to leave their home. Right? They, of course, went and stayed in Fatima and Usman's home, which is there in the book. But there were so many problems. They thought that if they opened the school, sab theek ho jayega. But they opened the school and they realized that there were more problems to be handled. So they came back stronger the next time. They planned to provide water, what is popularly known as the midday meal scheme today. Savitribai Phule was the originator of that.
Yeah.
She said, okay, let us give the children food and they will come.
Right.
Fatima said, okay, let's give the children a uniform and they might come. Because one of the families used to send their children in all finery with jewelry and all of that, because they wanted to reflect their status in society. So it was almost, the things that came up could not have been anticipated, right? So I think these people were so agile and malleable that they saw the problems and then they decided what to do about it.
Yeah.
And they kept improvising. You speak about the lessons from the book, keep improvising. You have a purpose. It's never going to look the same every single morning. As you move forward, the lines may shift a little bit and you need to improvise every single day. They realize that they need to bring the girls to school. They have to go home to home. And when they went home to home, that is when they realized that the acceptance is extremely poor for something like this. So Savitri, in fact, told Fatima that, why don't you become the headmistress? Let me do the outreach. Let me go out and get people to school. So again, delegation, role clarity, canvassing. I think there is so much that they had to do in their own limited way with whatever little they had. Because even as a contractor, it is not that Jyotirao had access to a lot of wealth. It was limited and he had to keep asking his friends for help. Yeah. And that is when they touched the Dakshina fund, which was traditionally something that only was for Brahmins, as you very well know. They touched the Brahmin fund and they requested the British to, make some allocations to them from there. And the British helped them for one reason alone. They wanted cheap labor. The Brahmins were very expensive to hire as clerks. It was literally impossible to fill in all the clerical positions with expats. So they thought that if we could teach some of the lower castes how to deal with us, how to read and write, then perhaps we may have cheap labor. So a lot of circumstances fell together in a manner that made people succeed. So all revolutions, I think, are, like this cauldron where you keep stirring and you keep stirring and the mix kind of keeps maturing and then eventually the revolution happens. So that is what happened at that time.
Right. Anything you want to add? Something that you found very interesting, but you couldn't really include in the book? Something that you take away from?
Even to the day that we were going into print, all the way to that, I was trying to find records of the children who had passed out of Savitri and Fatima schools.
Yeah.
And for me, what they did thereafter. So we have records of 2 children here, what they did. One of them, in fact, continued to become an educator. She testified in front of the Education Commission. And another historian based in London told me that the suffragette movement had a contingent of Indian women. And there is some evidence to say that they were students of Savitri and Fatima. And I am exploring this further at this point to understand, of course, the girls that studied in these schools, one can safely assume that they spread the light. And then, of course, this movement became stronger and stronger. Because once you expand someone's mind, it is not possible. It's like that rubber band, right? If you expand it to a certain extent, it's literally impossible for it to go back to that same thing again.
And then you just have to, so whichever step these people took, whoever came in and filled this position later had to go beyond that. They can't reverse it.
Yes. And it was, they set the juggernaut rolling. And I wanted to find out more about what happened. Could I have the histories of, say, 50 children who passed out and what they did? And that, for me, as a writer, I would have loved to take my readers on that journey as well. I'm happy that we could do what we did. And I'm happy that Fatima's story came forward in such a powerful way, perhaps for the first time in English literature, in Indian writing in English. I would have liked to do that.
Also, from the point they start with 6 girls, and then by the end, they have this huge ceremony where they invite a lot of people, and where all these girls are called to the stage and they answer questions. It just shows that there was so much hunger and there was so much need for education that people really wanted to come forward and learn. On that note, ma'am, I will say a big thank you to you for your book and for this interview. And once again, for our readers, this is the book you can grab online or you can get it from your stores nearby. Do read Savitribai Phule, Her Life, Relationship and the Legacy. Thank you so much.